Bit of a disclaimer before we start this. Paul extended an invitation to the GFA to come along and participate today. One reason or another, they haven't been able to attend. And it just so happens that I dabble in this area, along with recreational aviation. So by way of background, to keep it simple, the equivalent of grade 1 instructor rating with flight attendant privileges. That's putting it in simple context in both RAOs and the gliding environment, and I also fly GEO as well. Okay? So that's the background. So to fit in with the theme of today, what I've decided to do, because I don't have any prepared slides, because this was very much last minute. Can you fill in for me, Pete? And off we go. So what I've pulled up are two modules. The first one is on slow flight stalling, and the other one is on spinning and spiral diving. By way of a little bit of background, the GFA is probably, listening to what has transpired this morning, a pioneer in this area as far as aviation is concerned, not just in Australia, but around the world. Because as Paul says, one of the basics that the glider pilot has to learn how to do is to recognise the onset of symptoms of a stall or a spin, and then recover from it as instinctively as a matter of primacy. And I'll go into the reasons for that shortly. And really that's what we've been talking about, isn't it? In terms of giving people the skills to recognise the unusual attitude and then do something about it instinctively. So the language has been about attitude and angle of attack. Everything we do in the gliding world is all about attitude and angle of attack. Very rare we talk about speed. It's all to do with situational awareness, threat and error management, attitude, angle of attack, aircraft performance. This aircraft, for example, a Geodiscus, 20-metre wingspan, carbon fibre. It's a high-performance aircraft. It will travel cross-country at in excess of 120 knots, carrying up to 230 kilos of water as ballast to give it penetration. Those speeds, it has a very fine tolerance in terms of attitude relative to performance. It thermals, fully loaded, at about 50 knots. And that's only a couple of knots above the stall speed. And it will do that up to angles of bank around 50 degrees. So these are the reasons why, and the history behind why, within the gliding environment, we're teaching people about upset recovery. And it's fine, as you can see, this is theory lesson number 4. Forget what the next one is. I think it's theory lesson number 13 or something.
Your press 18.
18, right? There are 44 modules.
Sorry.
To become to be issued with a glider pilot certificate. That will enable the holder of that certificate to take the CASA and get issued with a glider pilot licence. They don't get issued very often because usually you only need a glider pilot licence if you're an Australian to fly in competitions overseas. Okay? Usually only reason. Why do we teach stalls and spins? Because we want to teach people to recognise the onset of the symptoms, the stick stall position, the quietness of the air around the aircraft, the importance of recognising the stall buffer, the importance of recognising the attitude of the aircraft relative to the horizon. All those things that we've been talking about.
And balanced flight through the string.
Yeah, absolutely, balanced flight. Now, gliders have got the best heads-up display that's ever been invented by man. Anybody know what it is? Shuffle? piece of wool, and it's used internationally. You've got a balance ball in an aircraft, glider has got a little piece of string, sits on the top.
They work opposite.
Yeah, very, very simple. I'll draw you a quick diagram. Here we go. You've got the cockpit, piece of string. The string is out to the right. You've got a hole. You obviously need left rudder to bring the string back. That is a very, very simple slip and skid indicator. That's how it works. It is brilliant and it is spontaneous.
Can I make a comment there?
Sure.
If you watch Top Gun, they actually have, there's a couple of frames on Top Gun, the original movie, where there's, on the F-14, there is a yaw string on the cockpit.
Is that right?
Front windscreen.
The other important thing, PJ, as you and I both know, is that the one great thing about the yaw string is it's in the pilot's view on the horizon.
The heads-up
It's
display.
not in the cockpit.
It's a heads-up display. So the other disclaimer to this is I'm not here representing GFA, okay, but I am part of the GFA team who has been asked to roll this new syllabus of training for both the pilots and for the instructors out around Australia. And the exercise is to have everybody trained and signed off on this new syllabus of training for delivery to students. And I think that you said you've got two at your club that have just started this journey.
Yeah, one of our FOIs.
Yeah.
In the Brisbane office, he's been to Worlds and everything with the GFA, very experienced instructor. Dragged a whole bunch of the FOIs out in the Brisbane office. So apologies if you can't find anybody in the Brisbane office, we're all up at Kimberley at 2 miles. Yeah, two of the FOIs are the two first who catch off the ring.
And we
Not good management.
And we teach people to fly these aircraft in this environment out here with anything from microlights to warbirds in the circuit at the same time. So it produces very, very competent pilots as a result of it. A handful of years ago, the Air Force actually purchased a fleet of aircraft not dissimilar to this, gave them to clubs around Australia to teach cadets how to fly. Why did they do that? Anybody want to give any suggestions? Other than the fact the chief of the Air Force at the time was an ex-glider pilot. It was so they would learn the basic primacy skills of pilot: stick and rudder, threat and error management, human factors, attitude flying. Okay? So there is a reason for it. Anyway, I'll run through this quickly. My purpose is not to give you a lesson in how to fly a glider, it's to give you some exposure as to what's happening. Again, we're talking about understanding why something's happening, recognising the fact that it's happening so you can prevent it, and if it happens, how to recover from it. That's the mandate that goes right through this. Again, critical angle of attack, basics. Exceeds. Not once have we spoken about speed yet. We'll show you what happens on the U-form, what happens. There's a couple of videos that sits in there. We're talking about angles again. So all this has been pretty professionally put together. You got your hassle check. The only thing missing out of there is the E. Why?
No engine.
No engine. But we do have performance self-launching gliders. In fact, it was only last week I was teaching a guy who had purchased a high-performance self-launching glider. It does have an engine in it. That engine's two-stroke, fuel-injected rotary engine. Pretty complicated stuff. It has a full FADEC system in it to manage the engine while you're under your own power. Slow flying. Hello, we've got another theme here, pretty constant. The nose is high, the stick's back. Sound gets quiet. The airspeed's reducing. The controls are sloppy and we get a bit of a pucker. It'll drop, we recover. These high performance aircrafts that you see in these slides, they have a rapid rate of acceleration. Once they go into a stall, if you do not respond appropriately, they will go through V&E at a speed, in terms of speed build up, that you would not believe. Every glider, no matter how archaic it is, with perhaps the exception of some of the very primary gliders, in general terms is a high performance aircraft. They will respond very, very quickly. Anybody know what a Blanick is? An old metal aircraft? Right. In my career as an instructor, I've had a student on 3 separate occasions put me inverted in a Blanick recovering from the stall, simply because he didn't get the right word picture when he was given the ground briefing, and instead of relaxing the back pressure, his instinctive reaction was noses drop, slam the stick forward. The aircraft stalled, he slammed the stick forward, and the aircraft has just gone inverted. Before you could do it, hit it out. So it happens to us as instructors as well. So that's the first one.
Next one.
The next one.
Apologies, it was lesson 6, unit 18, wasn't it, Peter?
I think so.
I read the wrong number, sorry.
That's
mate.
all right. So next one. So what you can see is these are very early in the syllabus for training. Get the next one up.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's just coming on.
So we've got
PJ, while,
any questions so far?
while that's coming up,
Yep.
one of the things that I see a lot in accidents and I see a lot in training is the symptoms of the stall. So this awareness.
Hello and welcome to the GFA.
Says that
Sorry.
Pitching very employing.
Yeah.
you don't have to talk anymore.
Not quite. It'd be nice if it was that easy.
Sorry.
Got that off.
Yeah, turn it off. Okay. So just by that, a small opportunity of exposure, you can see that the GFA has put a lot of effort into developing this stuff. And it really has taken a quantum leap forward to what used to be available. I can remember in the early days finding a piece of dirt on the at the threshold of the launch point, can't I, Neil? Where we sat there with a stick in the dirt, drawing pictures, explaining the concepts of angle of attack. So, aerobatic manoeuvres. And in gliding, in terms of teaching spin awareness, and that's the reason why we do it, because as Paul alluded, you can have multiple aircraft in a thermal at a high angle of attack, high angle of bank, and it can get ugly very, very quickly. Okay? In gliding, if people want to learn how to spin an aircraft confidently, we take them away and say, come back later, and we will do that as part of your aerobatic endorsement. Because in this world, spinning the aircraft is also as much about energy management, attitude, and situational awareness. Not all gliders can spin. Not all gliders are certified to spin. As I said before, high angle of attack, spiral dives and spins are an occupational hazard that we plan to recover. This aircraft in this, it's in the background here, it will lose easily 500 feet per rotation. We're talking about recognition and recovery.
There it goes.
Same basic procedures. Recovering from a spin in a glider is no different to recovering in any other or a conventional aircraft. Stages. How we demonstrate the basics. Talk about different stages of development. Fully developed and recovery stages. I think I've just gone back a bit more. CFG spin characteristics. We've been talking about startle and surprise all morning. The failure to identify what's going on around you. The failure in particular with a spin to recognise the direction and the disorientation. The tendency to pull back while the nose is still pointing to the ground. Insufficient control input for recovery. Some of these aircraft, if you don't initiate the recovery in the order that the manufacturer has put in their flight manual, at best the recovery will be delayed. At worst, it won't recover. So you really have to be familiar with the aircraft, particularly for an instructor, with respect to recovery actions. That has been put into this. The stuff that people assume that again, spiral guide recovery. That's been well put together. So the summary is the pilot needs to be able to recognise other things in spiral guide have their own characteristics. It's experiential structure and hopefully in terms of what GFA is doing.
Flight review. Got to spin every flight review.
Yes,
Currency.
Yep.
So what sort of hours do you put into the spin recovery point in terms of the driver pilot? Is it divided, so it's complicated, is it typically a big emphasis on it?
In the syllabus of training, there is a huge emphasis on it, for obvious reasons. And the statistics within gliding show that by far the majority of stall spin incidents are happening close to the ground circuit, usually when somebody is landing off airfield, as in what we call an out landing. And it's because they get preoccupied with what's going on. They're busy doing their checks in terms of looking for something that's going to hurt them or upset their day, and they're putting it down into an unfamiliar pattern. So again, they're focusing. We heard our friend this morning talking about some of the unusual what's the word I'm looking for? how when he is teaching upset recovery, he will get people looking out the back window and things like that, looking down the left wing. Well, unfortunately, that's something that causes accidents, incidents and upsets within the gliding environment, because they're actually focusing what's down on the ground rather than worrying about attitude and being cognizant of the aircraft and the aircraft's attitude relative to the horizon and the speed and position that they're in at the time.
There's a big
With
difference
respect,
in the general training. We all know this. Gliding has got this in it, and general aviation dropped it a long time ago.
yeah,
And kind of makes you wonder why, doesn't it?
yeah. So to pick up on Paul's point, by annual flight review, you must be able to demonstrate competency in recognising and recovering from both stalls, spins and incipient spins. It's a automatic more training if you can't do it. As far as the syllabus is concerned, it's competency based, and so there is a fair amount of effort and time put into this as part of the syllabus of training, and then it is a repetitive sequence all through the syllabus of training. It's not just sign it off once, good, you've got it, let's move on. It's introduced at every stage. And then there are three levels of competency or milestones, and the GFA calls them the A, B and C certificate, and at each one of those levels you have to again demonstrate competency in spins, spiral dives and stalls. So it is really driven home. Whilst GFA, there you go, John. Yep.
I was going to ask, do you keep any sort of, does GFA keep any or encourage any sort of no names, no tactiles? How often in that few knots between stall speed and your thermal speed, how often someone gets it wrong and has to do a recovery?
No, they don't. But experience has taught me that it happens frequently enough that it is to be a cause to ensure that whilst GFA mandates the biannual review, which requires these competencies to be re-demonstrated and retested, gliding clubs have the ability to introduce an annual review, depending on size, complexity of the fleet, operating environment, that type of thing. And again, if they introduce this, the local requirements, spins, stalls, and spiral dives are part of those competencies assessments. So at best, it's at least every 12 months. At worst, it's every 2 years. That's about it. That's a quick and dirty as a short-term fill-in. And any questions?
Most of your gliders are spin approved. Most gliders in gliding club spin approved.
Yes, they are, but you will recall that recently there was a stall spin accident that happened as a result of instructor spinning an aircraft that was not certified for spinning. At best it was spiral dives, I think, the situation. CASA put out some advisory material. After that, even the GFA went back and reviewed its fleet with a view of ensuring that spinning only gets conducted in aircraft that are approved by the manufacturer and certified as spin approved. You have a gliding fleet available at your disposal to help you with this sort of thing. And Neil and I have discussed this on many occasions. The only thing that is absent is the noisemaker. Okay? And I believe, and we're still in discussion, I believe that we can overcome that in the classroom so that the fleet can be used to augment this upset recovery training if it is needed to. Obviously, we want to do it in the principal aircraft that is used. But if we don't have access to this, and it is coming that all instructors have to be trained in order to do this sort of thing, then there is opportunity there as well.
Unfortunately, it costs an awful lot of money to do both.
You're right.
I'm a glider pilot by desire, and I can't afford to join the GFA just to do 2 or 3 flights a year, much as I'd like to.
Yeah.
It's gone up about $700 or $800 a year to do it.
Yeah, with the I think I'm going to use this. With the use or the cost of joining the GFA, yep, that's $350 a year exercise. Most gliding clubs, how much does it cost you to join the club? Over there?
250, I think. Yeah, 250.
250, yeah, same as what it is here. So you've forked out the best part of $700 and you haven't done anything. The other interesting area that we concentrate on in this as well is the majority of gliding clubs require their tow pilots to be competent in a glider, okay, or to at least have flown annually in a glider. And guess what part of that flight includes? Spinning, stalling, and spiral dives. Why? Because they don't get it in the GA environment. There are not many of the tug pilots, despite the fact we try to point them in that direction, that go to organisations like Paul's, UPRT, Jerry over at Redcliffe to do their flight videos. It's not something that we, as in the GFA, or clubs can mandate, but we certainly encourage it for those very reasons.
Can I make a suggestion then? If we're talking about the future of UPRT and we're basically workshopping where we're going, working with the regulatory and insurance industry and all that, if we think that it's worth getting somebody in a glider from as part of the UPRT program, surely we can approach GFA and say, rather than buy a full membership, just get a UPRT membership and show up at your club and visit. I mean, just a GA pilot without an engine trying to get him flying a straight line and a glider and maintain an airspeed, that's an ask straight off the bat, just attitude flying. But I mean, that's something that's why we're here to workshop. And if we approach GFA and say, hey, we think it would be beneficial for power pilots to get some gliding time. They don't want to learn gliding, they just want to experience it, do a spin or find out about real attitude flying. Can you give us some sort of cheap membership for that event? I don't know.
I believe the GFA would be responsive to an approach that would be beneficial to that sort of thing. They recently, for example, because tow pilots are becoming more and more of a challenge to attract and retain, only because the majority of the tow aircraft in Australia are tail wheel aircraft. We all know that's a unique set of skills in its own right. They've got a very cheap rate just for tow pilots. I think they charge a tow pilot $20 a year membership, which gives you access to all the insurance coverages and everything else. And then similarly, the clubs have come on board and they only charge $20 a year membership. So for a power pilot who wants to do that sort of thing, and it is and can be extremely challenging flying, because quite often glider pilots love to fly in weather that GA pilots just don't feel comfortable in. If you want to know what it's like to ride in a roller coaster with wings, tow a glider into wave lift. That will really get your attention, and believe me, you are flying right on the edge of the envelope. When you've got something like the aircraft I showed you, 700 plus kilos, max takeoff weight, with a couple of 100 kilos of water in it, and you're trying to get that glider into lift or into wave near a ridge, it gets your attention in a hurry.
Can I just to keep the data moving on, we just spent 10 minutes on the program, we're talking about stories from the floor. Has anybody ever, you had a question?
Well, I've got a question, but I've got a story exactly what PJ's talking about, particularly toe pilots, so I could bridge the two together if you want. My question, the first thing is, from a GFA competency in spinning and spin recovery to general power 3-axis flying, we learnt this morning, and the stats tell us that about 18% of loss of control accidents in flight are in missed approaches. The power, the precession, P-forces, slipstream, all the things that happen in the missed approach configuration, you can't duplicate in the glider. So I've given PJ a gap analysis of the syllabus, which I really, as a framework for the differences for people just converting from gliders to power and vice versa, for instructors and for pilots. And when we're talking about spin, UPRT competencies, aspect ratio, adverse yaw, propeller precession, there's a whole bunch of things that would be gapped out or missing in a 3-axis one. It doesn't mean that all the other things aren't extremely valuable. And in fact, the rotational speed, the pitch movements, and the response times that PJ's talked about will actually make you a better spin recovery pilot if you immerse yourself in some glider. So that's the first thing, just a bit about gap analysis and benefits and the SWOT analysis on the two things. The story that PJ's talking about is a tug pilot and a glider pilot. I did both. I had an experienced instructor on the back who got out of station laterally. I was holding full opposite aileroning, trying to hit the tug on toe. We were just coming from crosswind, got hit by a big thermal. Tug goes out, climbs up. I'm actually trying to hold the thing down and keep the thing level, hoping he's going to get back into station and get it. If I hadn't had spin recognition training, I wouldn't be here today, because I was at the point where I was at full opposite rudder and holding it, so cross control, and I knew that if I went any further, it would have broken. And the port air would have been down on the ground, you would have found me over there somewhere. So bang, off you go, mate. Dump the rope, see you later. And yeah, we did wrecked it. I didn't were you there? I don't think you were there that day. But that's a classic case of prevention, and you don't get a second chance when you're on tow. You get it wrong, and that's where that skill set is diminishing. And as PJ said, you can't get tow pilots.
So what we're just doing is kindergarten upward there.
So what Neil's talking about, that's the usual configuration. So you've got the tow plane, you've got 50 metres of rope, you've got the glider. If you thought formation flying was difficult, try doing it in a glider behind a tow aircraft.
It's not that tough.
Okay. Sorry?
Nothing.
It's not that tough. The scenario that Neil's talking about, there's an exercise in advanced manoeuvre in gliding that's called boxing and slipstream. So you all know about the wingtip vortices and everything else that come up. The process of the exercise is a coordination one. And the idea is to get the glider to move out to a point and hold it there. And to do that, you've got to have basically cross controls. So you've got full rudder. You hold it out here to the right, then you go up to get it up there. And in the meantime, the tug, if tug pilot's kind to you, he will fly straight and level. But if you get a tug pilot that finds a thermal, that ain't going to happen very long. So you could be in a turn. You get to this point and you will hold it with right rudder. The idea then is to slip across just above the slipstream and get it out to this point, in which case you've got left rudder. Then bring it back down again to this point, and then take it back into station. Keep the wings level the whole time. It's a very, very good coordination exercise.
So if we just keep moving on, Pete, those who deliver UPRT, have you ever had share some stories about people who come in, who you've flown with, who you think that could really do with upset training, and they just go over the bar with it? They just flatly refuse, or they don't think it's a good idea, or they think it's a great idea. Any
facility.
Up to there now,
I must say, I thought we would get that. We've actually got the opposite, that people who've been
We're up to this
type
one.
rating examiners and instructors for years on the one type, who've come
So
and said, gee,
that's
I
what all
didn't know
took,
what I didn't know. I'm actually one of those boxers.
stories from last week. We'll do that.
Says someone
30
who
cats.
looks, four-goal bars, big salary, I know everything, but actually I've come in and said, thanks for that, I needed that. Go back to bare metal and start again stuff. So I haven't actually enriched you guys with anything.
No, most people embrace it. And, just what's happened today here is that it's emphasised to us and I think to regulators is that, we've only been doing it part 1, 2, 1 because that's meant in the new regs. But two things that emphasised today through all parts of the industry, when you're gliding here especially, because you're on the, as you said, you're almost on the cusp of it all the time because you're flying those right at the edge of the envelope all the time. To the heavy jet transport, to the GA area, is that one, you need trained instructors who are teaching the right thing, and that may be tailored to your different area, such as the glider, such as the light aircraft, such as the on transport. The other thing is you need to know your aeroplane. And I think over the last 20 to 25 years, that has been missing in some areas of the industry. Especially this mindset of 21 days you'll be endorsed on an A320. That didn't used to happen years ago. It used to be 6 weeks. But now it's fast to get guys out there on the line. And one thing that has been emphasised, every aircraft is different. The glider is, from what Peter, is a light. This is so much different to some of the aircraft that you've been talking about, to what we know in the heavy jet transport. You need to know your aircraft.
And I'll show you a slide in a moment. A recreational aircraft, 600 kilos, has just been introduced into Australia. So just hold that thought.
Yeah.
Don't let
So,
me interrupt you.
some of those accidents there, they didn't know the idiosyncrasies. Your gliders have got a different regime and a different envelope to a 787, and fly-by-wire to a 737 with rudder, hard over rudder. There's different things there which you need to know your aircraft. And the thing that leads into that is the perishable skill of a pilot. If he's a private pilot and he flies once or twice a year, and he comes up for his flight review, which is under regulation in 2 years, that's a long time between wrecks. Now, a lot can happen in there.
And a good example of that is in the gliding environment, it's a recreational activity, and it's an expensive activity, we acknowledge. And one of the cohorts that are coming back to gliding as a recreational activity, as you heard, some of your colleagues from the Brisbane office have decided they'd like to come back and fly gliders for recreation.
Yeah.
The cohort that we find, or that experience has shown us, is probably one of the cohorts that experiences the most challenge making that transition back to the recreational environment is in fact the people who have been commercial pilots all their life, because of the performance and the dynamics of the aircraft they're now flying. It's the same in recreational aviation, it's the same in the lower end of GA that we get exposed to, and it's even more relevant in gliders, because the gliders are high performance aircraft.
But you're flying on the cusp of your envelope, and you're not that far off your critical angle of attack a lot of the time. And so that's the two things that I've taken away today is one, we're no different no matter where we are in the industry, but the importance of qualified, trained instructors on this is very, very important to teach. Two, it's got to be a frequency and recurrent training that's regularly done, because there's a perishable skill. But the other thing is you must know your aircraft, and that's very important.
I think expanding on that point, another thing that we haven't touched on yet is, like Neil said, we're not going to know the results of anything that we do or implement for maybe a decade. And we really need to put that peg in the sand, draw a line in the sand, and move forward. And we can only help those, we're talking about people that are flying right now. And I'm not talking about the airline guys, because they're supposed to have a professional attitude, and I'm sure most would have a safety approach, and they will embrace the training. I'm now going to put my GA and RA hat on, the guy who rides his own aeroplane and says, and I'm also a lady, and also Flight Safety Solutions is very keen on helping people maintain airplanes properly. RA gives a lot of latitude for maintenance if you buy your own airplane. However, it comes back to what we talked about before about the language that we need to use, like, and I saw on some of your slides, unload, there was the word unload a few times in there. We need to be using these terms, but it's airplane owners and pilots now, before we put the line in the sand. I just change my oil every 6 months and I go for a fly. I'm not really interested in that sort of thing, I just want to go for a fly. And whether they like it or not, they're probably like a glider pilot, and I've seen some of them flying around, and they are near the envelope, and they don't know what they don't know, but they won't engage. I did a flight review with a guy, he had 1,000 hours over 25 years, and he had 39 hours dual. So that tells me he got a license way back when, off of Moses or whoever, and he comes back to his flight review, but after 39 hours, I don't think he did very many flight reviews. But it's a culture. It's a culture we need to change, that it's not okay just to change oil every 6 months. We need to do regular maintenance because we've got aging aircraft issues. But it's a mindset of people that, I don't know if you get it, Jeremy, you're not in initial training 141. We get it all the time, we get phone call. What's the minimum training I need to do to get a pilot's license? Immediately, I'm not interested in flying with that person. And I'll go, mate, there's a couple of schools down the road there, you can go and talk to them. Because I'm not interested. They don't have the right mindset about how to fly, that the journey of aviation is a continual learning process. Then that's the mindset and the culture that we have to change. And that's whether you're an operator, a pilot, or an owner. The culture is, we need to find the best way to do this.